The Borderlands 4 FanFest just happened, and plenty of creators were able to stream a demo of the game for a few hours. Unfortunately, I was not one of these streamers, so I couldn't play directly, but my community and I were stream hopping and absorbing as much of the event as we could into our brains. There isn't a doubt in my mind that this will be the best looter shooter of all time, especially after everything we just saw. So let's show off some of it in this video. First thing I want to bring attention to is the damage numbers in this game. They are kept incredibly low. Now I realize that this is low level intro mission stuff and we don't see any endgame numbers, but usually guns are hitting much harder than this in BL3 and BL2, for example, even in the beginning. So it seems that damage numbers are dialed down a bunch. Also, in this clip, I noticed that the enemy modifiers on this mini-boss is Elemental Eater, and it seems to heal the mini-boss as you do elemental dot damage instead of hurting it, so it pays to keep those modifiers in mind. Another thing to point out here is that this mini-boss spawned from a random world event, allegedly. I say allegedly because nobody really knows the odds of these spawning, and there's always the chance that they can be scripted to some degree. But from what I saw and what from the other streamers were thinking as well, it seems to be totally random. As the one Moxie is fighting on screen right now was happening as he was on his way to another mission, and he simply went a few hundred meters out of his way to participate in it. Another thing to mention is game difficulty. Everyone who played it so far almost unanimously says this is the hardest Borderlands game to date, and a big reason for that is not because of bullet sponginess, but due to mob density, which in my opinion, as well as theirs, is a good thing to source your difficulty from. I think this helps to limit downtime and keeps the action flowing for longer, especially with the inclusion of classic kill skills and other stuff. Now, we are going to be getting a combat radar at launch, but the build available at FanFest did not have one in it. But you can see on the compass at least the amount of enemies that are around the Vault Hunter. There's usually a lot. But one thing I'd recommend to Gearbox as far as the compass is concerned is to add distance in meters to all hostile blips on the compass. I saw many streamers think that an enemy was glitched underground or something, when in reality it was like 50 meters away and behind a wall. I get the combat radar will solve a lot of these problems at launch, but seeing as it's off by default and how Gearbox seems to champion the idea of a compass, I really think adding distance measurements to hostile blips should be in there by default. And also, seeing the gameplay on screen just reminds me of this, but Maliwan weapons no longer have charge-up times, and will shoot as soon as you pull the trigger again. Maliwan is back on the menu in my opinion because I hated the charge-up mechanic for Maliwans. I was under the impression from the deep dive slow dev gameplay that grappling had static momentum and predetermined landing spots, but seeing this clip shows that it's momentum based and can really do a lot to speed up movement. Watch how much distance Jolts covers here by combining a simple glide with the grapple. Vehicles also have a dedicated jump button. Watch as Jolts jumps over this fence. Nothing major, but that's one thing I did not know about vehicles up until this point. Obviously they can be summoned to your side from any time, anywhere, as long as you're not inside a building or an isolated zone, but the jump button is seemingly pretty small, but it's actually a pretty big deal because if you've played any other previous Borderlands games, you know how annoying it can be when your car gets stuck on the tiniest things on the road, and this just simply helps to mitigate that and keep your car going. Jolts also started tackling things called bounties that led him to not exactly mini-bosses, but named enemies that were around the map. And after killing one named Beautiful Frank, he received a loot chest as a reward. Instead of a mailing system, it seems there is now a loot box-esque system that delivers rewards to you, and considering that non-legendaries are actually cracked in Borderlands 4, these rewards are valuable. Now, unfortunately, we don't know much about bounties, and after asking around a bit, I still couldn't find a definitive answer to my question of whether or not bounties were indefinitely repeatable, as they seem like a great way to kill some time or explore the open world with a bit of guidance, build up some levels, or get a chance at some new loot before progressing the main story or something like that. From this loot box in particular, Jolts got what seemed like a god-tier throwing knife. Now, for those unaware, grenades, rocket launchers, and other types of heavy weaponry are no longer standard weapons/grenades. They now have their own dedicated slot called the Ordnance slot. And of all the different types of grenades in the game, some of them can be throwing knives, which look incredibly sick and easily spammable. Also, we all know the gore and gibbing is stepped up a notch from the trailers, but I felt this was a pretty good example of it in an organic environment, as this is what will most likely happen to the average player. It looks great, by the way. Borderlands 4 features an open world as we know, and enemies have different entry-level difficulty depending on the area. For instance, while Killer 6 was exploring, he found an area filled with enemies that were a much higher level than him, indicated by the level being replaced with an exclamation point. Now, we don't know the finer details of it, but apparently after you get past certain areas/missions, you can return to those areas and they will scale with you so that you can still get on-level loot. which is definitely a good thing in case there was a dedicated drop you wanted to target farm. We also saw the return of immunity phases, unfortunately, and please don't quote me on this as I've been asking around and getting mixed answers, as well as not being able to find the tweet I thought I heard this from, but I think immunity phases are only present on bosses that have them for the first kill. Like, Horus here rips his bolt out, which is a pretty big deal, like it's story significant. So they show it off in an immunity phase, but I could have sworn I heard or read something saying that for future kills and farms on bosses that have immunity phases, the immunity phase will not be present. Again, don't quote me on that, as I unfortunately haven't found the source I saw that from, and the people I've asked have been hesitant on the specifics as well, but I sure do hope it's the case because immunity phases kill a boss's farmability. Creators were also given level 20 characters and access to a vault containing a few heavily packed arenas that they need to clear before they fight a large vault monster. We'll talk about the vault monster in just a bit because it is hands down my favorite part of the entire fanfest that we got to see, and I am still reeling from how cool they are. But the arenas themselves are exactly that. Combat trials that are heavily packed with enemies, but one thing in particular I noticed in these arenas were a special crystallized type of enemy that has a separate health bar and needs to have its crystals destroyed before it can take health damage. There were a few light mechanics like this as they fought through the arenas, and to me, they kind of rang out as BL4's version of anointed enemies, and it seems like Gearbox learned their lesson from BL3. These enemies serve to pose a threat to the Vault Hunter more so than a regular enemy, but instead of just having invincibility-coded animations like the Iridium Shield, the slow-moving Ethereal Shift, and just actual invincibility to headshots and stuff, they found a way to make these enemies engaging, and their ability to die lies solely with the player and not locked behind any arbitrary time gate crap, at least from what we've seen. And here is the Vault Monster fight, and this fight alone blew me and my expectations for Borderlands 4 out of the water, and they were already very high. I'm talking, like, I am probably one of the most excited people you'll ever find for Borderlands 4, and this blew my expectations out of the water. Seeing the mechanics, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, this must be what an endgame boss looks like, maybe even a raid boss. I mean, it has telegraphed attacks, it has mechanics built into it, but let me tell you, this is not an endgame boss according to the developers. This is just a regular level 20 boss and is not a representation of what they consider to be a mechanically in-depth boss fight. Now, if we're comparing it to like a Destiny raid boss that you need 6 people for, then fine. But a Borderlands boss? We've never seen anything like this in the series before. This is apparently tame for Borderlands. Nah, man, this is crazy. And I am beyond stoked to see what they do consider to be an endgame boss if this is only a mid-tier fight in their eyes. This looks incredibly engaging, and I want to fight it so bad. Also, after defeating a Vault Monster, you can actually get traversal upgrades, which I think is also crazy considering all the gameplay we've seen up to this point has been intro mission difficulty and leveling. So the gameplay already looks very fast, but as you guys progress through the game and take on vaults, you'll get upgrades to the already fast-paced looking movement. Guys, this game is going to be peak, just saying. And I'm sure many of you have been waiting to see this thing in action too, so here it is, the Miss Moxie Encore Machine. You pay some cash to respawn the boss, save quitting does not respawn the boss this time around, and this is the only way to do so. And the devs have said that the current system is not set in stone, so it might change, they might make it free by launch, but we just don't know yet. I'm personally okay with paying for it every time as long as it's a static price and not something that will change to be a percentage of the cash I have on hand. If I'm saddling up for a big farm on a boss, maybe I'll go play a bunch of other content in the game to get cash, then blow it all on a couple hundred farms. I'm actually very content with that kind of gameplay loop because I actually lose interest in endgame Borderlands when I just find myself doing nothing but farming bosses for drops all day. I think forcing players, not giving them the decision, I think forcing players to go out and play other aspects of the game would do a lot to keep things fresh, because the reality of this situation is that players don't always know what's best for them, and they will burn themselves out while farming bosses, unless they are forced to do something else for a bit. I know that's a little bit of a spicy take, and there are eccentrics out there, a lot of hardcore Borderlands fans that will sit and farm a boss for upwards of 10 hours at a time and get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And I'm not trying to like cramp your style or anything like that, but I do think the average person needs to be forced to do it because they will often opt to farm until they burn out, and that could hurt their enjoyment and longevity that they get out of the game. I also want to show off this fight from Jolt's POV because I want to show that these bosses aren't just bullet sponges. These creators weren't given god tier loot and they were allowed to spec their skill points themselves. I think you'll be surprised to know that this, with a tiny bit of tinkering on a level 20 character and a blue rarity pistol, is what you can pull off.
Okay. Dude, we have like stupid damage. If I would have crit him, it would have been insta-wipe.
That covers the most of it, but we're just going to cover a few tiny things that I left out at the beginning. So for instance, there are vault symbols back in the game along with a bunch of other collectibles, and these are how you get STU upgrades now. And last, and probably the most important thing shown off at the BL4 FanFest was the ability to go fishing with your grapple hook. Now I know this sounds like a gag, but it is there, and apparently you can also get unique legendary gear from fishing. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. But yeah, those are my main takeaways from the Borderlands 4 FanFest. Please go follow all the people shown off in this video as they are all wonderful Borderlands content creators and all deserving of the support. I hope you all have a great day. I'm Haderaxe, signing out. Peace.